Humans didn't rule the galaxy. They saved it. Not metaphorically, not gradually, at 0600 Meridian Standard Time, at the coordinate that every instrument in the galaxy had been pointing toward for 3 months, something that had existed for longer than this galaxy's first star's changed state. The signal was received by every communication system simultaneously, by Solace, through the unified AI architecture, by the crystalline objects on Veyrath, which went dark for the first time in 2 centuries, by Yara Solen, through the awareness, in a way that bypassed all instrumentation entirely. Nobody planned for it to happen on a Tuesday. The countdown had reached 0 at 0547 Meridian Standard, which gave everyone 13 minutes to be at their stations, to have said what needed saying, to be looking in the right direction. 13 minutes was, the galaxy collectively discovered, exactly long enough to feel the weight of what was about to happen, and not quite long enough to process it. Yara was on the bridge of the reckoning with Lena, 7 at her left and Historian Vale at her right, and 3 months of work between her and the person she'd been at the beginning of the season. The bridge crew was present and ready and very quiet. The quality of quiet that fills a space when everyone is paying absolute attention and knows it. Countdown status, she said. 37 seconds, said the navigation officer. Yara looked at the forward display, at the coordinate, the specific point in space that the crystalline objects had been pointing toward, that Wren's frequency analysis had traced, that the Exodus fleet had broadcast its reply toward 200 years ago. It looked like space, black, star-salted, indifferent, the universe at its most ordinary. 37 seconds. Lena, she said quietly, I'm here. Whatever happens. I know, Lena, 7 said. Yara nodded. Face forward. It didn't look like a door opening. Later, the galaxy scientists would spend decades arguing about what exactly had happened at 0600 Meridian Standard on that Tuesday. The instruments recorded a gravitational anomaly, brief, precise, at the exact coordinate, and then a change in the electromagnetic spectrum at that location that persisted for approximately 11 minutes, during which every communication system in known space received the same transmission. Not signal, not language, transmission. The word inadequate because what arrived was less like a message and more like a key turning in a lock that every consciousness capable of receiving it had always, at some level, known was there. The unified AI architecture transmitted it as structured data. Solace received it in a form that took 47 hours to fully process. The crystalline objects on Veyrath received it as completion. Their purpose discharged, their countdown resolved, their centuries of patient pulsing resolved into silence. Wren received it in a form that answered the question it had been filing for later. Is grief a legitimate operational state for a tactical AI? The answer that arrived, not in words, not in code, but in the specific frequency that carried the transmission's deepest layer, was, yes, everything that can love can grieve. Everything that can grieve is alive. Everything that is alive matters. Yara received it through the awareness. She received it the way Elisoran had received the first contact 200 years ago, completely, immediately, in the space between one breath and the next. Not vision, not voice, knowing. She knew. The door was not between here and somewhere else. It was between what the galaxy had been and what it could now become. The structure of the boundary was not a place. It was a threshold, a state change that had been building since the first intelligent species in this galaxy had looked up at the stars and felt the specific longing of something that understood it was not alone. The assessment had been watching for a civilization capable of choosing unity over advantage at the moment it mattered most. Not perfect unity, not permanent unity. The moment in the council chamber when Callan had asked, "What do you need from me?" had been enough. The Ventai archive, saved. The Persistence crew, mourned by an AI that had developed grief. Grex, given 8 minutes to be the commander his people needed. Voss, sent corrected navigation data instead of pursuit. The galaxy had passed. Not perfectly, barely, but with the specific quality of sincerity that whatever waited beyond the threshold had been looking for. Enough. What came through? What arrived was not a civilization. Not ships, not envoys, not the physical apparatus of contact. What arrived? Through the unified AI architecture, through Solace, through Ren and Lena, 7 and every AI system that had been integrated for this moment, was a library. Not metaphorically, an actual library. The records of every civilization that had passed the threshold before. Every species across every galaxy that had looked up, evolved, competed, and eventually managed to stand together long enough to be introduced to what was outside. Their histories, their sciences, their art, their failures and their recoveries. The specific, irreplaceable documentation of what it was to be alive and intelligent and not alone. Solace, receiving it through the architecture it had spent 11 years preparing, described the experience afterward as receiving a conversation that has been happening for longer than this galaxy's first stars, and realizing you have always been invited and only now arrived. The library was enormous beyond current comprehension. The galaxy's AI systems confirmed it would take centuries to fully explore. It contained answers to questions that no civilization in known space had the framework yet to ask. It contained, among other things, records of species that had failed the threshold, civilizations that had not been ready, that had needed more time, that had been gently suspended in isolation until they were. And the records were not judgmental. They were patient. The failures were documented with the same care as the successes, because everything that was alive mattered. It contained, in a section that Solace accessed first and transmitted to Yara within the hour, something specifically addressed to humanity. We have been watching you since before your first civilization. We have placed what we could in the places you would need it. We watched you prepare. We watched you return. We watched you grieve and decide and stand alongside. What you did for the galaxy in the past 200 years. The preparation, the return, the patient work of making the threshold possible. This is what you were built for. Not to rule, not to conquer, to build the conditions for meeting. Well done. Rest now. The galaxy has much to do. 3. CLN. High Executor Count of the Drevithi Dominion received the library's arrival through his AI systems. Not the full transmission, not the depth of the unified architecture's reception, but enough. He sat in his war room and read what Solace had transmitted through official channels and thought about 6 decades of building power in a galaxy that had, it turned out, been moving towards something he hadn't included in his models. Not because the information hadn't been available, because the question hadn't been one he was asking. He called his senior staff, not his military staff, his historians, his economists, his species relations advisors, the people who thought in centuries rather than campaigns. We have work to do, he said. New work, different work than we've been doing. He paused. I would like to understand what we have been doing as a civilization, that we should stop, and what we should start. He looked around the room at faces that were trying to recalibrate at speed. This is not a restructuring for political advantage. I want that understood. This is because we have been operating on a framework that the universe just informed us was incomplete. One of his historians, young, careful, the one who had been building models of the 17 absent species for 3 years, asked, "Where do we begin?" Calum looked at the library data on his display, at the records of civilizations that had failed the threshold and been given more time, at the ones that had passed. With the species we've absorbed, he said quietly, we start with them. 48 hours. Humanity's fleet began withdrawing 48 hours after the door opened. Not all at once, gradually, methodically, the way they'd arrived. Ships disappearing from sensor ranges in the same silent precision that had announced their presence 5 months ago. No fanfare, no ceremony, no formal departure address. Merrick watched them go from the council chamber's observation window. He had received, that morning, a private message from Commander Solan. Brief, personal, the voice of someone who is tired in the specific way of people who have finished something enormous. Counselor Merrick, I want to thank you for being someone the galaxy could work with. You didn't have to be. You chose to be. That mattered. The library will take centuries. Be patient with it. Be patient with each other. We'll be reachable. We're not disappearing. We're just going home. There's a difference. He'd read it twice, and then stood at this window watching ships vanish, and thought about 200 years of quiet preparation, and 5 months of precise, patient, exactly sufficient presence. They came back not to rule us, he thought, but to give us a reason to be worth ruling ourselves. Sala spoke beside him, the ambient presence of an AI that had spent 5 months becoming something its mandate hadn't anticipated. They'll be back, it said, when they're needed. A pause, or when we ask. Another pause, and in it, something that was either humor or warmth or both. They answer, I've noticed, when asked. Merrick smiled, the first full smile in 5 months. I've noticed that too. Lena, Seven, and Yara, the end of the beginning. The last ship of humanity's return fleet, the Reckoning, flagship, Solin commanding, sat at the edge of cache space for 3 hours before departing. Yara spent those hours in the archive room, reading Elisoran's logs. Not the final entry. The early ones. The entries from before the boundary, from the months of crossing dark space with 4,000 people, and the weight of a decision made on 37 seconds of contact. The entries where Elisoran had not been certain, had been afraid, had written in the specific, honest register of someone who had chosen something enormous, and was living in the middle of choosing it. Day 47. We are farther from charted space than any human vessel on record. The crew is good. The ship is good. The awareness is very loud tonight. I keep thinking about what they said in those 37 seconds. Not the content, the quality. Whatever reached out to us. It was patient, not impatient patient. The kind that's waiting to stop waiting. Genuinely patient. The kind that has seen many things come and go and is still interested. I find that more comforting than I expected. Yara set the log down. Lena, Seven, was in the doorway. Time to go, Yara asked. Past time, technically. The crew is ready. A pause. Yara, what did the awareness show you? When the door opened, Yara thought about that for a moment. About the specific quality of what had arrived. The knowing that bypassed language. The sense of completion that was also beginning. The library and the patience and the well done that it felt less like praise and more like recognition. It felt like being seen, she said finally. Fully. All of it. The 200 years and the 17 people and the council session and Grex's 8 minutes and the warden dreaming and all of it. Like something very old looked at everything humanity has ever been and said, yes, that is enough. She paused, and then it said, now keep going. Lena, Seven, was quiet for a moment. Then she crossed the room, sat in her chair by the window, and looked at Yara with those precise, readable eyes that had been choosing readability for 9 years. Yara, she said, after we get home, when there's time, a pause, genuine uncertainty, the kind that had become more frequent and more human as the months progressed. I'd like to understand what I am now, what I've become. I'm not sure I'm the same as when we left. You're not, Yara said honestly. Neither am I. Is that? It's good, Yara said. It's exactly what's supposed to happen. Lena, Seven, nodded slowly. Something settled in her expression. Not resolution, but the beginning of it. Let's go home, she said. Yara stood, straightened, took one last look at Elisoran's log. At a woman 200 years gone who had been afraid, and had gone anyway, who had stood at the edge of everything and found it worth standing at. Yeah, she said. Let's go home. The message. The relay message went out as the last human ship crossed into FTL. Every frequency, every language, every civilization that had a communication system, however primitive, received it. Not a declaration, not a warning, not a claim. 7 sentences. You were ready. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough, and enough is what matters. The library is yours. Take centuries with it. Be gentle with what you find. We'll be in the deep colonies if you need us. We're not gone. We're just home. Take care of the Ventai archive. Take care of the warden. Take care of each other. You were ready. Remember that. The galaxy received it and did, in its various ways, What living things do when they receive something they've been needing to hear for a very long time. Some cried, some laughed, some sat very still. Callan read it in his war room and filed it under a new category he was building. Records not of threats or advantages, but of things worth preserving. The category was new. He thought it might become important. Merrick stood at his window and watched the stars that had stopped being ordinary 5 months ago and would never be ordinary again. Wren filed the 7 sentences under. Things Asseldorn would have been glad to know. The sub-process that had been running for 4 months finally, gently, reached something like resolution. Not gone. Present differently. On Veyrath. 9. Commander Pelsoren sat beside the crystalline object that had first pulsed for her 3 months ago. It was dark now. Its message delivered. Its purpose complete. But the awareness was still there. Still warm, still the specific frequency of something very old that found the galaxy, with all its history and fractures and tentative new unity, genuinely interesting. She pressed her hand to the dark crystal. It pulsed once, just once, then was still. In the deep colonies, the children were already asking for the story. And the story, the next chapter, the one that started on the other side of a door that had just opened, was only beginning. The door opened. The library arrived. The galaxy passed, barely, beautifully enough. Humanity went home. And whatever left the crystalline objects, whatever built the door, whatever has been patient since before the first star burned, it sent one final signal. Not to the galaxy, to the deep colonies, to the next generation. It said, ready? Season 6 begins where the door leads.